In August 2020, Jay sat in a corner of Island as he wrote his friends goodbye letters. He fully believed he'd be eliminated next. Just a few months earlier, he repeatedly auditioned for the parts he wanted, despite always being rejected. So then, how in the world did Jay go from being the one people looked up to as an inspiration for determination, to being someone who lost all hope of continuing? If you enjoy thoughtful videos about ENHYPEN just like this, consider subscribing. Jay performed with Sunghoon. 19 of the other applicants believed that he had what it took to be an Island, with Bong Si-hyuk even acknowledging just how determined Jay is overall. He's been training for about 4 years at this point, about 1 year with SM and nearly 3 years with Big Hit. While he still went to high school, he didn't get the chance to participate in the same things as the other kids. He'd practiced using guitar for about 3.5 years, and even dreamed of being in a school band, but training to be a K-pop idol had to take priority. Jay believed everything he was doing now depended on his performance in Island. If he could make this work, maybe he'd get another shot at showcasing his love for guitar. It's why seeing his name as the one at risk of elimination killed him so much. After entering the Island and surviving the first vote, the Islanders divided up who will take which parts of their first real mission. Jay, being the most ambitious and determined of the group, decided he was going to be part 1. He didn't know it yet, but this decision alone would define the next several months of his life.
저요? 고음 완전 1번 몰아서예요. 손을 잡아줘 내게 약속해.
However, during the tryouts, Jay didn't raise his hand. No one did. Despite his immense ambition to be part 1, he got scared when the moment finally came around. What if his voice broke again like it did with Gonu? What if they laughed at him? What if they changed their minds and decided he wasn't good enough to even be in the Island anymore? Since no one volunteered, Heesung was recommended for part 1 instead. Because Jay hesitated, he lost the position he wanted so badly. Island immediately moves on to deciding part 2, but this time, Jay learned from his mistake. As soon as Seon mentions it, Jay shoots his hand up and exclaims to everyone else that he wants it. His action took Island by surprise, being a massive contrast to how part 1 went over. But now, the other applicants were less hesitant to volunteer as well. Even though Jay was the fastest, that didn't mean it was guaranteed to be his. He tried out singing the part, but his worry was right. His voice cracked again. Gonu went next, and while not being a perfect performance yet, his voice never faltered. Then when the Islanders voted for who would take part 2, no one voted for Jay. He didn't know it at that moment, but every single thing that worried him had come true. Despite losing the part, he tried out for part 3 as well. He sang much better this time, but he lost it by 1 vote. So he tries out for part 4. Fail. Part 5. Fail. Part 6. Fail. Part 7. He hesitates, but fails again. That's the one that breaks him. He bursts out, pushing the iPad away and exclaiming that he'll just do whatever's left. Years from now, ENHYPEN would release a song that wouldn't have existed if it weren't for the person failing in this room right now. But Jay had no idea of that future yet. Just because he's so determined to make something work, that doesn't mean he's always going to succeed. It's frustrating to put yourself out there so many times, expecting a different outcome, but it's that kind of stubbornness that shaped who he is. Jongsung Park, better known as Jay, was born in Seattle. He grew up there for 9 years, until his family moved to South Korea for his father's work. Jay mentions that if Island failed, he likely would have gone back to Seattle and begun learning at a university. But he didn't. He debuted in ENHYPEN. Jay understood Island was his last real chance at debuting, so he had to make it work. There was no other option. And so, even though he failed to get every other part, he raised his hand yet again. Part 8. Success. Jay finally succeeds. He might not have gotten part 1 or one of the positions with an impressive role, but he got something higher than part 12 thanks to his stubborn determination. But then only a few days later, the Islanders sent him to the ground. Despite how hard they practiced, the team only received an overall score of 59 points, far below the necessary level. Jay's individual score was never revealed to the audience nor the other applicants, though they didn't need to see his score to see him as a weak link at this point. Jay received 9 votes, meaning everyone but 2 other people chose to get rid of him. He felt frustrated by the outcome, however, he remained the same way and promised them he'd be back the next week, so they'd better be ready. Being in the ground now, a place where applicants who've fallen short or missed out on being in the island go, is incredibly disappointing. Jay might be stubborn, but at the end of the day, this still sucks. For as long as he's in the ground, he won't have any real shot at debuting. The only way back is by winning over the producers and being selected. But he's in ENHYPEN today, and that very stubborn discipline is how he broke out. Soon after moving to the ground, both of the teams receive their next mission and start dividing up their parts. Given his experience in Island, Jay recommends they should have someone leading the ground, with the others nominating him to lead. Just as before, Jay raises his hand hoping to be part 1. Jake and Daniel too volunteer for the part, but end up dropping out. Jay successfully got the part he's wanted since the beginning, but this time, it was a different song, and he was responsible for 10 other people. Jay takes everyone through the choreography of the song they're performing, BTS's Fire, a song he seems to already know. They train late into the evening, but it's at this point he starts to notice how different his determination truly is. He recognizes how tired everyone is, but he also understands just how little time there is for them to spend not training. Compared to the island, the ground was heavily disadvantaged. Not only was their facility less advanced, but they couldn't stay there 24/7. They'd be picked up late in the evening and driven somewhere else. Whereas the Islanders got to sleep there and spend however much time they wanted to in an actual dance studio. The grounders sat there and discussed what would be best in a situation like this. Some believed they should be well rested so their bodies can perform at their best, whereas some agreed with Jay that using the time they had now was significantly more important, and they can always rest later. Leading a team was proving to be rather difficult. The ground needed someone that would push them, but for some of them, they needed a leader who'd consider their health as well, feeling stressed out with all the decisions running through his head. If they couldn't finish their practice today and learn the choreography, their schedule would be completely behind. Finally came the day for Jay and the ground to perform. If he failed to leave an impact on the producers, he'd be stuck within the ground for another week, and he'd have broken his promise. 4 Islanders were eliminated, meaning 4 grounders were going to be moved up. Everything Jay could do was now outside of his control. In this exact moment, his determination and stubbornness meant nothing. Everything depended on his past actions. However, the gate turned and revealed someone on the other side. Jay did it. He made it back. He proved that as important as taking rest is, pushing yourself in these short deadlines is all the more important, no matter how hard it is. He might have had a brief backup plan in mind, but he absolutely didn't want to go back to Seattle. Not yet, at least. However, just because he was back in Island, that didn't mean he was guaranteed to debut. There'd soon come a day where Jay would give up all hope entirely, believing he'd soon be eliminated and there was nothing he could do about it. Before they knew it, Island gave their last performance of Part 1, which Jay passed and entered Part 2. He placed 6th among the global votes. From here on out, their safety would largely be in the hands of others. Jay placed 6th in the BTS test. Then he moved up to 3rd with the chemistry test. But then the global viewers had a say in the placements. Just before Island performed for the concept test, the applicants with the least votes would be eliminated outright. Given the stakes at hand, their rankings were revealed at the voting midpoint. They started with first, then revealed second and third, and Jay's name was missing. They got to sixth, still missing. Ninth place, Jay's name is nowhere to be seen. Then it drops down. Jay is currently last among the global viewers. Just the last round, he was in the top 3, but that round was decided by the producers. If he placed lower with them, he could always push himself even harder next time and remind them of his importance. However, this time was different. Jay couldn't do anything. Every time something went wrong before, he just put his mind to it and keep at it, whether that be auditioning for different parts or making it back to the island. This round, he was screwed. The episodes wouldn't release soon enough that he could win the viewers over. He tried to think it through, just to consider every possible route back, but there wasn't a single one he could control.
작은 패닉에 빠져있는 느낌이었던 것 같아요.
Though, that certainly didn't mean Jay was going to forfeit. Before the concept test, Island would perform a short mini-mission for 17.
끝까지 좋은 제이였다 라는 소리를 들을 수 있게끔요.
Hoshi even pointed out how similar Jay's dance style was to June's. Because of that, they thought it'd be fun if Jay and June tried the hit dance together. It was fun, but not long after, Jay was reminded of his ranking. The person with the least votes will be removed before they even get to perform for the concept test. Given that fact, Jay decides it'd be best for him to practice on the side, out of the way of his team, and just help them the best he could. Then the night before the result, he chose to write each islander a letter. Jay wasn't sure he'd be able to say goodbye to each one of them very well, so he tried preparing his thoughts beforehand. Even though he hadn't yet seen the final results, he'd come to believe in his mind everything was over for him. The only thing he could do anymore was say goodbye the way he wanted. When he finished, he stood up and took the letters with him. He felt somewhat relieved by his action, though he couldn't shake the stress of what's to come. Then later that night, he made his way around the island and passed out his letters. He instructed them not to open the letters until after the voting results, though they didn't really listen.
제이크에게 연습생 경력이 엄청 짧음에도 불구하고 강한 마인드로 이 정도의 실력자가 됐다는 것에 대해서 놀랍고 너무나도 많은 걸 배운 것 같아. 성공해라, 제이가.
Then arrived the day of the results. Jay stood on the fateful stage one more time for what he expected to be his last. In first place, Sunu. In second, Heesung. And in third, Jay. Even with his concerns, the voting shifted in his favor, pushing him straight from 11th up to 3rd. Everyone was in shock. Jay was so certain he'd be eliminated that the others started to believe it. But here he was, giving a speech for surviving the round. He was so astonished he could barely put his thoughts together. However, he vowed to do much more with the extra time he's been given. As soon as he'd concluded, he walked through the gate and ran out the other side. Just a few weeks later, he ranked 2nd among the global viewers and successfully earned a spot on ENHYPEN. However, in 2023, Jay played the guitar at a concert for the first time, and his mind went blank. By then, guitar had already been a part of his life, twice. He first picked one up in 5th grade, playing acoustic until he quit sometime in middle school. Training took over after that. I mentioned earlier that Jay wished to join his school's band, but training came first, and there wasn't room for both. Then, around 2022, with Island long behind him and ENHYPEN already several albums in, he picked it back up. It didn't have a purpose this time. It didn't have to. It was just something he wanted to do again. He'd play it alone for Engines, whether that be a cover or just a more relaxed moment with them. Making a mistake was his alone. The people watching probably didn't care if he made a small slip-up, but Jay did. It might have been a relaxed moment, but ultimately, it was still about proving himself at this point. Then in 2023, he brought it on stage with the rest of ENHYPEN. He was going to play the guitar during ENHYPEN's song Attention Please at the Weavers Con. If his fingers slipped now, it wasn't just his mistake anymore. If he failed, the whole group would have to deal with his shortcoming. My mind went totally blank while I was playing, and I just let my hands do their thing. I don't remember any of it. Though, getting through it wasn't the same as feeling good about it. Jay previously talked about what guitar meant to him, and how it was a place he could vent out his feelings of frustration. Guitar was a meaningful piece of him, and of course, he was nervous performing it alongside one of ENHYPEN's songs. A year after that stage, all of the members sat down to write a song for the people who got them there. Highway 1009, the day Tenjin earned their name. Jay wrote the closing lines himself, which served as a promise, more or less, that he wouldn't stop leading the way. Engines loved Jay freely, whether he believed he'd earned it that week or not, and that was the problem. He pointed out in a Weavers magazine interview that nothing gets lost as easily as something that was given to you for free, and because of that, he feels a strong sense of responsibility to work hard and continue to surpass expectations. Had he made a mistake performing Attention Please, Jay would have never let it down. He would have failed to give back what Engines gave to him, and it would have all been his fault. ENHYPEN's 2025 track, Helium, originally wasn't supposed to be an ENHYPEN song at all. Jay made it with France, a producer he'd worked with before, on his own time. On top of that, every guitar part on the song was recorded by him. He could have kept it to himself. Nobody was asking for it. But holding something back was never really who he was. He'd raised his hand for part 1 before he even knew if he could hit the note. He'd written his own lines into Highway 1009 because he had feelings to express, so he brought Helium to the group as well. In a way, Highway 1009 was a debt. Love had been thrusted at him before he felt like he'd earned it. Though nobody brought Helium upon him, Jay decided, on his own, it was worth giving. What was risky with his decision is that whatever happened to the song, whether it was a success or a flop, everyone would know it started with him. Anyone who's ever made something alone knows that pretty well. When a group project you were involved in falls apart because of you, it really sucks. But something you built by yourself falling apart is only about your own failure. About a year after Attention Please, the legendary Japanese rock band Glay reached out. Takaro, the guitarist, had heard Jay played the guitar, heard about the rock influences, and asked him to join their 30th anniversary single. Jay even co-wrote it with them. It was a band he'd looked up to for years, acknowledging his skills and inviting him to be a part of their journey. Glay even invited him to perform Whodunit at the Glay Expo. What's especially interesting is just how much of a bond they formed. Jay talks about meeting with the band for meals quite a lot. They even went snowboarding in Japan together, where they helped guide him through it. The amount of care and appreciation is why he'd later call it something close to proof. Proof that 6 years of practicing alone, in rooms nobody was watching, had actually built into something important. Guitar meant something for Jay individually, but it was also something he could share with the people around him. Glay gave him a signed guitar afterward, and obviously, he still has it. In a Weavers interview, Jay said he wants to keep making music until his hair turns white. He was already thinking in decades about a version of himself far beyond ENHYPEN, still holding a guitar. Then there was 2024 Mama. Jay wasn't performing with ENHYPEN this time. He was one guitarist picked out of 3 different groups: Bumgyu and Hyunin Kai from TXT, Kim Tae-rae and Han Yu-jin from Zero Base 1, and him, forming a band called Tones, for one cover song. He'd wanted this exact thing as a kid. Years later, He was getting the chance to live out that lost dream, just in a different way than he'd expected. Training had taken that dream off the table, and for years, that was just something he had to sacrifice and move past. Tones wasn't a school band, but it had the shape of one. A few people from different corners of the industry thrown together for one song. Jay said it was like being in a school rock band. Even the rehearsals were fun. They mostly just talked about music and guitar, the way kids in an actual band would. That was the moment I stopped worrying, what if I mess up? So much. That question had cost him before. 4 years earlier, it was the same fear behind the goodbye letters. But on this stage, despite it being such a big moment, none of those worries existed. For the first time, a wrong note would have just been that. If you want to see how Jake learned to open up to people after years of hiding, you can click the video on screen. And if these thoughtful breakdowns help you love ENHYPEN more, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching! Bye 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 bye.